Hello, this is David Hawkins here, and today's article is ominously titled Adapt or Die. Nowhere do you need to be more adaptable than with a business on the internet. The landscape is changing every second, and it's a battle just to stay sane with all the information floating about. However, the surefire way to stay afloat is to provide genuine value to people and not to jump onto every shiny object that pops into business. I think, of course, we all know this, but emotionally we sometimes want to go the easy route. So I read about this story and I thought how relevant it was to SEO. It just reinforces how important it is to have a long-term perspective on SEO and for your business online for that matter. Okay, here's the story. In 1967, a famous experiment was carried out. Now, I just want to warn you, this story may offend you if you're a dog lover. It's not terribly harsh, and if you can accept that they consume thousands of dogs in China and Vietnam, then you may be able to swallow this. Martin Seligman and Steve Meyer, both psychologists, designed a set of experiments using one predictable environment and one unpredictable environment. Those taking part would be two dogs, let's call them Rex and Rover, one in each environment. In the first predictable environment, an alarm sounded randomly from time to time. Shortly after, Rex, the dog, would receive a mild electric shock, irritating but not painful. This irritated dog was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to prevent the shocks by pressing a disabling switch. Needless to say, Rex learnt fast. Alongside was the second dog, Rover, and unfortunately this one didn't have the same opportunities in life, or in the experiment. The scientists called him the yoked dog. This experiment was the same as next door in that the strength of the electric shocks were the same, exactly the same, irritating but not painful. But there were two differences and were actually quite subtle. The second dog didn't have, one, any alarm sounding before the shocks, and two, a switch to disable the shocks. There is a saying from Charles Darwin, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives, it's the one that is most adaptable to change. Darwin was right. The fact that Rover couldn't predict what would happen left him without an understanding of his environment. And if you can't understand your environment, it's very difficult to adapt. Now, here's where the story gets more interesting. See if you can relate this to your internet strategy. Once Rex and Rover had adapted to their environments as best as they could, the second test began. This time around, both dogs were placed in a shuttle box, a large box with a low fence through the middle. Randomly, a warning light would be switched on, and a moment later, half the box floor would emit a mild electric shock to half the box. If the dogs jumped the fence when the warning light came on, they would avoid the mild shock. It's important to point out now that both dogs were now physically in exactly the same scenario. So would they both use the same tactic? Rex, our dog who has retained control throughout, didn't bat an eyelid. He quickly learnt to jump the fence. Job done. But what about Rover? You'd assume he would follow suit, right? Him and Rex would just bound over the fence to avoid the shock. Unfortunately wrong. The reality here is rather sad, and even more so when you relate it to human behaviour. Rover, his broken spirit, laid helplessly in the corner, crushed by this new reality he had now accepted. After learning in the first experiment that shocks came randomly and inescapably, Rover accepted a life of unpredictability and pain. That, my friend, is the importance of having scope beyond the present and beyond making a little money. This tells us that just because our environment changes doesn't mean that our mindset will change with it. Dogs are creatures of habit and patterns, and whether you like it or not, we're no different. So what can we humans do when we're in this kind of situation where we don't understand our environment? Perhaps say a Google algorithm update. We humans are lucky, we have intelligence. While it doesn't necessarily translate to survival, as Darwin pointed out, it does give us an opportunity to rise above difficult situations and scenarios that we will encounter throughout our business's growth. By channeling experiences into a realistic understanding of the internet and where it's heading, we can immediately deal with these stressful situations and changes. There are only so many questions we can answer throughout the day, and we are continually bombarded with new challenges. The only way to keep from being overwhelmed is to understand the bigger picture.